All right, so we're going to go ahead and start because I know this is everyone's lunch break. Today is going to be a little bit longer than normal. So typically we go about an hour, but today we're going to go an hour and a half since we have two wonderful speakers. For those of you who have not been on Zoom before, you'll see a little box at the bottom that has a Q&A. So if you have any questions or any comments during the talk, you can post that there. You just click that and it'll come up and you can type in. I will be monitoring that the entire time, and we'll either save the questions for the end, but if it's something urgent, like you have a problem you can't hear or the audio's gone out or anything like that, then I will address it briefly in the chat. You can also raise your hand. For everyone there, your audio and your video is off just so you have privacy while you eat your lunch. But we will also be kind of turning our audio and our videos on and off as well. For those of you who don't know, I'm Annie Newton and I am the program and development director at the Alliance for Historic Hillsborough, and we welcome you guys today for the lunch and learn that we're doing with the Burwell School. Today we'll be talking about the slave records, and we're joined by Mark Chilton and retired Judge Beverly Scarlett. So the way that today is going to work is Mark is going to go first. Again, if you have any questions for him, put him in the chat box and we're going to get to those at the end. So Mark is going to go, then Beverly's going to go, and then all the questions we're going to address at the end, again, unless it's something urgent, like again, your video went out or something like that, and then I can address it right away. So Mark is going to go first, and he is with the Orange County Register of Deeds. He went to UNC as an undergrad. I'm glad he picked the right school, and he studied geography. He is a 1997 graduate of NCCU Law, and he has been in local government since 1991. Beverly Scarlett, she's a retired judge, and she's a native of Orange County, North Carolina. She is a 1983 graduate of St. Augustine's University in Raleigh, North Carolina, where she received a Bachelor of Science in Medical Technology. She did go on to get her law degree from NCCU as well. And in 2007, she received an appointment from Governor Mike Easley to serve as a district court judge. She worked to assist children and families by becoming a primary judge for abuse, neglect, and dependency court, drug court, family drug court, and domestic violence court, as well as truancy court. So as you can see, she's got a lot of experience. And in 2021, she retired from the bench, having served the state of North Carolina for 33 years. She also, she's a woman of many talents, and she also enjoys fishing and music. So without further ado, Mark, I am going to kick it over to you. Again, I'm going to turn my audio and my video off, and Mark is going to go, and then we'll jump over to Beverly Scarlett.
All right. Well, hopefully everyone can hear me all right. My name is Mark Chilton. I'm the Register of Deeds. You just heard. Thanks for that introduction, Annie, and thanks in a big way to the Alliance for Historic Hillsborough and also the Burwell School Historic Site for sponsoring this event and inviting me and Judge Scarlett to appear. Judge Scarlett and I often appear together and talk, so I try to, whenever we appear together and talk on a related topic, I try to keep my comments more short and let her do most of the storytelling, because I think it's important, especially whenever we can, to center the African American and other voices of people of color and women. But I'm, as Register of Deeds, I'm the custodian of a lot of Orange County's old records. And one of the things I did when I became Register of Deeds was endeavor to go through all of the records that we have from before 1865, before emancipation, and try to determine which records related to enslaved people. And we found basically how I did that is I started at Orange County Deed Book 1, page 1, and began to proceed page by page through the handwritten records of Orange County to look for and identify, catalog all of the records which mention enslaved people. And we had to go up through about Deed Book 38, which is when you get to the time period of emancipation in 1865. And that amounted to around 18,000 pages of handwritten documents. I went through all those myself to identify which documents we were looking at, and then I had some interns from the University of North Carolina and from North Carolina Central University. Khadijah, I don't know if you're out there watching, but she was one of them. Who then took the references that I noted down and cataloged all of them, entered the names of the people involved into a massive database. And we found a total of about 1,600 records in all that reflected what we would call bills of sale. So what I'm trying to describe to you is that because enslaved people were considered property and not people, when an enslaved person was sold or given from one person to another, it would be accompanied by a bill of sale. And that bill of sale would be typically recorded or commonly recorded in the Orange County Register of Deeds office. Now, just as, for example, we would do with a car today, you don't do that at the Register of Deeds, you do it with DMV, but you record the fact of the sale of the car. And this was done basically in a similar fashion for enslaved people. We found, as I say, 1,600 different records that referenced, I don't have a grand total on the number of people, but somewhat more than that, a couple of thousand people within them, and created this database. And you can visit and see this database at a website. Maybe Annie, I could ask you to type this into the chat. The address for that website is ocncslaverecords.blogspot.com. ocncslaverecords.blogspot.com. And so sorry, let me get where I want to be. Here we are. So that that process revealed a lot of records to us, and yet we also know approximate numbers of enslaved people that lived in Orange County at each 10-year interval by looking at the census, because the census, U.S. Census each 10 years would gather that data as well. What we can, although it doesn't, the census does not provide very much detail on the names or ages or genders even of the enslaved people that they cataloged. It does give us an overall sense of the numbers. And I think what's one thing that's important to realize is that the numbers suggested by the census are far greater than the number of records that we found in the Register of Deeds office. That's partly because some enslaved people were not sold at any point. It's partly because some bills of sale were simply not recorded in the Register of Deeds office, even though they were eligible to be recorded here. And it's also in part because sometimes slaves were sold out of county. So if the buyer lived in, say, Guilford County, then they might have recorded that bill of sale in Guilford County rather than Orange. So when a slave was sold across county lines, we don't necessarily see that record recorded here. Having compiled all those records, one of the things that so sometimes happily these records do at least mention how some of the people are related. It might say, you know, a slave named Harriet and her two children, Joseph and whatever. So that can help us to construct some additional historical and genealogical information about the enslaved people. And we're always grateful when we find that. Unfortunately, it often doesn't include that kind of detail. And so it can be much more difficult to know what to make of some of these records. However, in at least some cases, we can manage to see where multiple different records about an enslaved person being transferred from one owner to another, and mentioning of the names of children or of parents can help us sort of reconstruct and peek back behind what I call the wall of slavery, behind the curtain of slavery. Slavery, the institution of slavery amounted to a kind of curtain that was pulled across the history of enslaved people. That there were thousands and thousands of people who are a part of the history and heritage of Orange County, about whom we can know very little, because their story was actively suppressed, because records were typically not kept about them. And these few records are some of the only things that we can know for a fact about them. However, on the positive side, at least in some cases, and as Judge Scarlett will soon tell us more about, while these records tend to be sort of what I would call skeletal, providing us really just an outline, just giving us the most basic minimal facts about some of these people, oral tradition that has passed down through families, down to living people today, sometimes having been written down at some point, sometimes only just now being written down, can help us to put some flesh onto the bones, to see these records, see more than just these records, not just see these as data points and numbers, but as real, living, breathing people who lived and who suffered, but who also experienced joy, who experienced the full range of human emotions, and people who, many of whom ultimately survived this horrific experience of having their lives so completely controlled by others. Now, many did not survive that experience, but the fact is that there are huge numbers of people of color who live in our community in Orange County still today, and actually across the United States, who are the descendants of people who were once enslaved in Orange County. And their presence in our community across the country is a testimony to the will to survive. And while the story of slavery is a story of tragedy and cruelty, it's also a story of survival and of emancipation, ultimately, at least for some. And I think that story is something that is critically important for us to recognize and to embrace. That's why we brought these records forward, and have created this website to make them more accessible. And incidentally, if you look at that website, anywhere you see a reference that says Deed Book 2, page 108 or something like that, that means that you can go and either look physically at Deed Book 2 in our office in Hillsborough and turn to page 108 and find that record, or you can go to the Orange County Register of Deeds regular website, click on search records and follow a couple prompts, and then enter Book 2, page 108, and pull up digital image of that record. All of those records have been scanned and posted to our website, so they're all available. And I guess the other thing I'll say is that having gone through those 18,000 pages and found all of these records, it has become clear to me that that looking only at the records of enslaved people that are mentioned in the Register of Deeds office would be a mistake, and that there's a lot more out there than simply what is recorded in our office. The clerk of court of Orange County maintained a separate set of records about all sorts of legal matters, And most of those records or all of those records from this time period, from before 1865, are at the State Archives in Raleigh. And so we have, in partnership with Clerk of Court Mark Kleinschmidt, have attempted to begin to look at some of those other records that are stored over in Raleigh, to try and begin to compile an additional database of places where enslaved people are mentioned in court records, in wills, and so forth, and state records, in order to create a more expansive version of this database that will allow us to take a still further look at the records of enslaved people. And at the same time, and then I'm just in a moment going to turn things over to Judge Scarlett. At the same time, my work on this subject and my work with Judge Scarlett, when she wandered into my office and began asking some questions that interrelated with the research, the data collection that we were already doing, what we found is that, or what I found, she already knew, I'm sure, is that there were, in addition to the thousands of enslaved people in Orange County, there were, let's say, hundreds for sure, hundreds and hundreds even, of free people of color who were not enslaved, who lived in Orange County prior to emancipation. And so we've also begun a project to begin to collect up any data or information that we can find on free people of color. And hopefully we will have at some point forthcoming a website that will share that collection of data in order to make it easier to research the lives of people of color from before the Civil War who were not enslaved. That both of those projects are now ongoing. Hope to finish up in the relatively near future and get back to you. But I know that Judge Scarlett has many ancestors who were free people of color. She has some ancestors who were enslaved people. And she and I have spent a fair amount of time researching, especially some of the free people of color. And I understand, and I want to prompt her to mention that she has some sort of work, a booklet, I believe, forthcoming. And I'll let her tell you more about that. That will be about touch much more on free people of color. And that's not our subject for today, but I mentioned that by way of saying if you want to have me and Judge Scarlett come back sometime in the future, maybe next year, to talk about free people of color as well, we'd be glad and honored to do that. I believe I'm speaking for you, but I think I'm right. Anyway, with that, I will hand it off to Judge Scarlett. Looks like, Judge, you are on mute, so unmute yourself and I will mute myself, and let's keep on. Thank you.
Mark, thank you so much. I do know that there are questions in the chat, but just to remind everyone, we will get to all of those at the very end. So keep them coming, keep writing them in there. But I just want everyone to know that we will get to those, but we're going to do it after Beverly Scarlett goes. Beverly, I am going to share your PowerPoint. Just give me a second. It's user error, not the technology. So just give me one moment to get that all set up. And if you want to go ahead and start chatting, I will share my screen.
Very well. I will go ahead and start chatting. Thank you all for joining us today. And Mr. Chilton is right. We presented together several times, and I wandered in his office with many complaints, many impassioned pleas, and we've discovered some wonderful, beautiful things together, not just about people in Orange County, but about my own family, and a little of which I will touch on later in my slideshow presentation. But we're going to go at law school pace today because I have several slides and I do want to save time at the end for questions. And so today I'll be addressing attitudes about slavery in Hillsborough. Next slide, please. So just talking to people in and around town, people will acknowledge that people in Orange County held slaves. They didn't just hold them. Slavery was a widely accepted practice. I would hear people say, well, only 8% of Orange County's households held slaves. And, you know, I didn't respond, but I would always think, well, when was that? What time period are we talking about? Are we talking about 1800? Are we talking about 1860? You know, where are you getting your information? And this theory softens the whole tragedy behind slavery because it does not consider the significant number of slaves held on large plantations. Next slide, please. So we're going to have a brief review of two of the town's elite, William Kane Sr. and Jehu Whitted. For those of you who have read my book, The Harris Family of Orange County, North Carolina, know that there is a picture of the what we call the big house for the hardscrabble plantation. I remember as a child going to this house because my mother's first cousin lived there, and I thought it was the ugliest house I had seen, of course, until I started researching. I didn't know it was two houses put together. But with my mother's first cousin being there in that house during my lifetime, my family has some connection to that place. And I'm still discovering that, but we'll start with William Kane and later talk about Jehu Whitted, which is a part of my bio family line. Next slide, please. Okay, William Kane Sr. Acquired the land that would become Hardscrabble Plantation. He actually named it Pleasant Grove. He himself served in the North Carolina General Assembly and North Carolina Senate. In 1800, he owned 4,417 acres of land and 30 slaves. By 1830, he owned 95 slaves, and the plantation operated producing wheat, oats, corn, tobacco, and cotton. And this information is from Open Durham. But I know through my research that Kane actually engaged in the slave trade. Next slide, please. So what was William Kane's attitude? Let's just take a look. And thanks, Mr. Chilton, because you made my work a whole lot easy. I actually went on your blog spot and was able to find a few deeds that I will share. And I have paraphrased here. Far left, Orange County Deed Book, the book number 16, 346, you'll see James Palmer. He is the grantor. And you'll see Kane Sr. and Kane Jr. get slaves along with Thomas Clancy. And I've highlighted the name and number of the slaves to give them some respect and for us to view them as people. But you see their names: Sam, Glasgow, Tony, Jack, Hannah, Jenny, Prudence. And this was done to secure a debt owed to William Kane Sr. So these aren't just slaves, these are people who have been mortgaged. Next slide, please. All right, Duncan Cameron. We all know Duncan Cameron from Stagville. Duncan Cameron, William Kane Sr., William Kane Jr. Here the Kanes are grantors to Thomas Holloway. And you'll see the date. Nancy and her children, Minerva and Sally. Next, from George Herndon to William Kane and James Yarborough, Negro boy Peter, and we have his age. And then William Kane to his daughter. If you go and look at the record, he does identify Martha as his daughter. a small Negro boy slave, Sam Black. That goes to Sam's complexion. And Sam is only about 4 years old. Next slide, please. So William Kane Sr. to his son, and you'll see what he is doing is creating a family legacy of slave holding. So he's actually passing slaves along to his children. And William Kane Jr. gets a Negro man, David, a Negro woman, Emmeline, and her child, James, Eliza, and her child, Mary Ann, and a girl, Fanny. Next slide. So here we have another transfer to his daughter, Martha. And that's of a male, Plato, described as Black, being about 45 years of age. And then here, William Kane is the grantee, William Courtney, the grantor, a Negro slave named Africa. And there's a deed of trust being held. So Africa is securing this debt. Next slide, please. Kane to William Pratt, the fourth part of a Negro woman named, I don't know if that's supposed to be Millie or Miley, but that's how it's written in the record. So 1/4 of this human being is owned by somebody different. Next slide. So I found this so exciting. I went on the UNCG website for runaway slave notices, and who appears? William Kane. And this is an actual slave runaway ad for Henry. And he wants Henry back. And if somebody can find him and have him confined to the jail, it looks like they're going to get $25. And if taken out of the county, it sounds like you can get $50. So I think this is pretty interesting. But he gives a description of him. 5'7", well-formed, very Black, meaning very dark skin, large red eyes, and that's probably a reddish hue in the white portion of the eyes. And he considers him to have a bad expression. And today we probably, you wonder why. Next slide. All right, this one is a little more difficult to read, but this is about a slave named Jim, who's actually a shoemaker. And Jim runs, he describes Jim in this particular ad as being a tolerable shoemaker, and that he flutters with it looks like flutters, but it's actually stutters. I think the typeset, the S looks more like a F. But he later describes his clothing and all of that kind of stuff. But when we go to the next slide, please, we will see even more information about Jim, and he really wants Jim back. In the previous slide, I think he was about 30. Now he's about 40 years of age. And he says he's near 6 feet high, light complected, bow-legged, very likely, and that he's a very good shoemaker. But this is what I find most interesting. Jim had no cause for going off except for striking his overseer, for which he expected correction. Makes you wonder. Next slide, please. Okay, just before we get into Jehu Whitted, I will tell you that the Kane plantation operated for a very long time and didn't end its operation until the Civil War. Thanks to Steve Peck, he forwarded me a slave narrative that was done by one of the former slaves on Hardscrabble. Her name is Sarah DeBro, and Annie, please remind me, and I will send you the link to the actual written narrative, and we can send that out once you send the slides to everyone. But William Kane Jr. actually dies before his father. If you look on Open Durham, it says differently, but when you look at William Kane Sr.'s will, you will see a reference to William Kane Jr. being dead. And so the plantation ends up in the hands of another son, Dr. James F. Kane, who is a surgeon for the Confederacy. And what Sarah described so interestingly is how there were so many slaves on that plantation that Dr. Kane James had no idea how many slaves he owned. And he would be going about doing whatever he's doing. And he would see them walking along and stop and ask who you belong to. And they'd say, oh, I belong to Dr. Kane. And they were proud of him for being a doctor. And he'd just say, oh, well, I'm Dr. Kane, and then go on, but really didn't have a whole lot more to say. I've also learned that there is a person who is the bio descendant of Dr. William Kane, who has the obituary for her ancestor, which I will send along, but he as a child was on Hardscrabble, later moved to Durham, where he actually became the first taxi in Durham for African Americans, as well as the first grocer. All right, we'll move on to Jehu Whitted. Jehu's position is a bit different than William Kane Sr. Jehu Whitted is the son of William Whitted Sr., and we know of the Whitted house being directly across the street from Dickerson's Chapel. Jehu Whitted was very wealthy. I learned recently that he once owned the lot where the Dixon House currently sits, so where the Alliance operates out of. There, Jehu Whitted once owned that lot. Jehu had a Black mistress and 5 children. They were all considered slaves. He later married and had 1 child with his lawful wife. Once he realized he was sick and probably not going to survive, he wrote his will and attempted to emancipate his Black children via his will. Next slide, please. All right, and here is the actual case as it is printed in the North Carolina Supreme Court Reporter. And interestingly enough, this case is started by nobody other than Josiah Turner, who, if you just dig through some old court records, you find his name everywhere. I think at one point he eventually became the sheriff of Hillsborough, but he did a lot of interesting things. And so once Jehu dies, Turner marries Jehu's widow. And this case is really about Turner wanting everything that Jehu had. Next slide. All right, we'll see at section 617 where the defendants, who are actually Jehu's brother, William Whitted Jr., Levi Whitted, talk about the purpose of the will is to emancipate slaves. And Turner is saying, hey, these cats threatened to remove the slaves from this state or country or beyond the jurisdiction of the court. And Turner is saying he wants them to be enjoined or court in a restraining order to prevent these hooded men from carrying off a huge asset, which would be the slaves. Next case, please. I'm sorry, next slide, please. I think I'm in court again. All right. So the defendants are saying, yes, there was a slave, Fanny, who is actually Jehu's youngest child, that has been emancipated, and Fanny was emancipated. You can find those records. I think I saw it in some of Mr. Chilton's records online, but it's actually recorded. Fanny managed to be emancipated. But Fanny also had siblings, Duncan, James, Stephen, and Betty. And the real crux of the issue is whether the remaining siblings and their mother, Hetty, will remain slaves or become free. And so the brothers, hooded men, are saying, we really believe the law says that these Negroes have been placed in our hands in trust, and it is our duty to use our best efforts to carry out the intent of the testator, Jehu Whitted, and that is to have these slaves emancipated. Next slide, please. So the North Carolina Supreme Court, as you can imagine, didn't think there was anything positive to come out of emancipating slaves via will. They actually reference a prior case that they use as precedent, and that is in the matter of Craven. And so they declare that the emancipation of the slaves, in this case, via will, is void, and that all of Fanny's siblings and mother will revert to the testator's next of kin, who his next of kin would have been his wife and daughter Anne. His daughter Anne died in her minority, so she never became an adult. And then the wife who had married Josiah Turner died. So this is my personal quandary. The daughter dies, and then the widow dies, and Turner ends up with everything. So I wonder if Susanna, the wife's death, isn't suspicious, but that's my personal opinion and something I'm working on. So only Fanny, the youngest slave, was freed. The brothers, James, Duncan, and Stephen, actually fled, and I do have a runaway slave ad on them. I didn't include it here because I knew I had a small time frame to work with. I have no knowledge of what happened to Sister Betty and Mother Hetty, but it's likely they became Turner slaves. So they're probably African Americans in Hillsborough carrying the last name Turner, and they're actually Whitteds. Next slide, please. All right. So Jehu wasn't the only person around Hillsborough considering emancipation through will. Here's a case where William Ray Sr. is actually instructing his son to emancipate his slaves. And you will see his language until the arrival of the period when by law the aforesaid slave may be set free and emancipated. I have great confidence in the sobriety, prudence, and honesty and fidelity of my son on the condition that he emancipate her when legal. And so this is one of James Ray Senior's slaves, Lucy, I guess that's how you pronounce it. It's spelled L-U-C-E. And so he had wanted to emancipate and could not via will. And so he's entrusting his son. Next slide, please. here's another instance, Fanny Thompson, and to William Charlie Thompson. And this young man is actually her slave. She describes him yellow in color, about 15, and he had served her faithfully. And she wants to emancipate him, but she's not even sure about the law and how she could go about doing it. And so I think her attempt is to try to just do this in a written document, but she makes it condition that he must leave the state, which would have been the law at the time if he's emancipated. So if he decides not to leave the state, then she, Fanny, will still serve as his master, and he is subject to her orders and command. And there is a similar provision that will be at Orange County Deed Book 25, page 456 for Charlie's wife. Next slide. All right. So now we're going to sort of change from my maternal side of the family to my paternal side of the family. And this is some amazing work that Mr. Chilton did and discovered that helped me better understand my family. If you've read Ribbons of Color, then you know about the story of Levi Christmas Scarlett, who was enslaved to two white women who ran their own plantation. And at the age of 9, just before the Civil War ended, they entered into agreement that if Levi would stay with them on the plantation, that they would amass, and keep them, that they would then give him their land, in which they did. As you know, a 9-year-old doesn't have the ability to contract, so this was just a personal discussion, but it happened. I was able to figure out from Levi's marriage license, as well as I saw a reference some time ago, I think in the will of John Scarlett, it may have been, that Levi's mother's name is Bunsheba. Here you will see a record of John Campbell to William Norwood, William Kirkland, Thomas Ruffin. And it talks about land. It talks about land along the Eno River. And then it starts to talk about humans. Highlighted Nancy and her children, Goodwin, Randall, Anthony, Madison, and Alfred. Those are Bunsheba's older siblings. Nancy is my paternal 3rd great-grandmother. And consequently enough, none other than Thomas Ruffin is providing money for the slave trade. And he allows an estate for 2,000 years. I can't even, my head can't calculate that, unless Campbell repays all debt sooner. He has 2,000 years to pay. He's not going to live 2,000 years, but anyway, that's my soapbox. Next slide, please. And here is actually a transaction from the Orange County Deed Book. It's written Barsheba here, but I understand the given name is Bunsheba. She used the nickname Bunny. She's a 16-month-old female. She goes from John Campbell to John Scarlett, hence my last name. And again, merely 16 months old. So at the time when Thomas Ruffin was participating in the slave trade and having an interest in my relatives, in the prior slide, you saw Bunsheba wasn't yet born. But if you start to look at the year and do the basic math, Nancy, Bathsheba's mother, was walking from either Gates or Bertie County while with child. I do know John Campbell is the heir of a plantation in Bertie County, but I also saw a reference to Gates County. And of course, my Eastern North Carolina geography isn't good enough to know exactly where Bertie is and as it relates to Gates, but I do know they're on the Eastern Shoreline. For the 4th of July, I got to spend time in the area of Gates County along the Great Dismal Swamp, which was pretty life-changing for me in a positive way, because I do know my people came through that area. Next slide, please. Oh, so we're to the end already. I went a little faster than I had imagined. So at this time, Annie, if people have questions, I'm happy to take them.
Beverly, thank you so much. That was fascinating. Both of you all were wonderful. Mark, if you want to turn your camera and your audio back on, we will now take some questions. We already have some in the chat box, so excuse me. If you guys, we're going to give everyone just kind of a minute to think of their questions, continue to put them in, but we'll go ahead and start. So there was the web address that Mark gave us. It looks like it's been added in there, but I will also send that out. Beverly, you said you were going to send me something, so I'll send out that the slave records website as well as the link that Beverly is going to send us. But I will get the video from today, the recording. I will send that out to everybody early next week. So one question is, I think this is for Mark. Have you had any response from folks who are descendants of slave owners in Orange County? And Beverly, I don't know if you could also respond to that too. Maybe Mark is quickly eating his lunch.
Yeah, but well, one thing, the answer is yes, if it's no more than myself and my family. And I do know that he's working with, I think there are Clarks in Chapel Hill.
Wow.
Yeah.
Our next question, are there thoughts about the motivation of some of the slave owners who wanted to emancipate their slaves as long as they left the state?
Yes, so I can answer that one. That was part of my latter presentation with Fannie Thompson. So yes, there were people willing to do that. What I've learned through this journey is being a slave master wasn't as easy as one may think, particularly if you weren't wedded to traditional notions of slavery. So if you treated slaves mildly, people were not happy with you. You got a lot of flack. I do know the Whitteds, my immediate ancestor was first in the part of Orange County that was carved out to become Alamance County. And he left there and came into this section of Orange County because he was being treated poorly for his maltreatment of slaves. And I got that via oral history from my mom long before I did my research. It was part of the impetus for my research.
And I will also say too that the law in North Carolina was that if you were freed, you had to leave. And
no, that was the law.
There was a law in North Carolina, a law in Virginia as well. And those laws continued to get more stringent as more slave rebellions happened because people were afraid. And so some of that was also part of the process. So if you did emancipate your slave, your enslaved people, or maybe just one enslaved person, maybe in your will or just as an arrangement, it was the law that they had to then leave the state. Now, this law, I believe, was early 1800s is when it was passed.
That sounds about right. That sounds
Yeah,
about right. And
Thomas Day was a freedman from Virginia who had to get special approval from the state of North Carolina to even come here. And so it gets kind of tricky when you read some of this stuff because the
to bring
laws.
his wife here. When
Yes,
he
yeah,
tried to get
yeah.
married, he had to get written permission from the General Assembly. Although he married in Southern Virginia, I can't remember if it was Mecklenburg or Brunswick, but he had to get written permission to bring his wife into Milton, where he was living and set up his shop. I will take this moment to say this. A large part of that impetus too was free people of color were considered such a threat to the slaveholding system that slaveholders wanted all free people of color gone.
Yeah.
My mom's side of the family, hence my indigenous heritage, my great-grandmother, even after the end of slavery, was still walking back and forth between Southern Virginia and North Carolina, depending upon how strictly laws were being enforced. But you could die if you ended up at the wrong place at the right time, and it would be no recourse. Nothing would happen to the person that did that to you. For my mom's family, the Harrises were initially freed by a Whitted in Southern Virginia in 1660. So Harrises have been free people of color all that time, but as you move from Virginia to North Carolina, South Carolina, back and forth, the laws are changing. They're being enforced, not strictly enforced, and so it's difficult to live.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times too, you see this movement, like you said, trying to get around the laws or try, you hear, okay, well, this county maybe is more lenient. I can't live here anymore, so I've got to move. And then they do, and then there's a new law that's passed. And so there's a lot of movement between North Carolina and Virginia because the western part of both of those states are very, very similar. And so you do see a lot, like you said, your ancestor was walking back and forth, and you see that a lot. And I always think about this with Thomas Day, and it just shows how important the state saw him, that they allowed him to come here, because they were so strict and, like you said, so afraid of successful freed Blacks or in people of color in general. And it says a lot about how they felt about him and what he could do for the state. It's not that they liked him, they just thought that
no, it was what he could do, namely build furniture that ended up in the governor's mansion under each governor during his time of service when Thomas was alive, building the stacks at UNC when that university started, for the library. I mean, when I refer to the stacks, and even the reference I made to Africa in my slide, there is an Africa who's emancipated, but he works with a white individual and they operate a still. And once that business, after 12 years, the business is no longer in operation, Africa is given land, but then all of a sudden this land is being sold or traded out to whites. And the land is somewhere downtown Hillsborough because it references King Street. So it makes me wonder what Precious Africa, who becomes Africa Parker, is faced when he's no longer serving as a steel master.
I always think that case is so interesting because I feel like so often, people are like, oh, it's amazing. He freed his slave. This is so wonderful. And it's like, no, there are a lot of catch-22s in there. And it was not out of this, kindness of his heart. There's a business arrangement in that.
Yeah, there's a business arrangement, and I'm sure Africa needed to be a free man to travel wherever to get whatever supplies they need. You know, I don't know what you need to make bourbon or whiskey or anything.
Something.
Yeah, it means something. I just don't know what it is. But of course, the white person is not going to be the one engaging in all of that travel and doing the hard work. So yes, it's not all benevolence.
Well, and slavery in the 1790s looks very, very different from what I think kind of we currently think about slavery
Yeah.
in general. And it's very different from slavery in the 1800s. And so, you know, he was emancipated, I think, what, 1790 something? I forget the
That's
exact
about right.
date.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, you know, some of that, again, it looks different. And I wonder if William would have done the same thing in 1815.
Probably.
Probably not. Because, you know, slavery has really taken a chokehold on the South at that point.
Yeah, because I think by 1802, I can't remember the total number that Dr. Parker told us, but it's something like 2 million slaves just in and around any particular, you know, area. And so then there's a question, is like, okay, if we have that many in North Carolina, that many in Georgia, wherever, oh my goodness, there are more people of color than us. So then the transatlantic slave trade is coming to an end. Say, don't bring any more. We thought this was a good idea, and it's not. But of course, people found ways to still bring slaves in.
Yeah.
Such a
Steve, it looks like you have your hand up. You can actually take yourself off of mute if you'd like to just ask the questions. I don't see it typed in here. So if you want to
because I regret that I came in as a panelist, because I think I was in the previous Zoom we had a lunch thing. I was a panelist, and it wouldn't allow me to come in any other way.
It's totally fine.
So thank you for this. I had a question. Well, actually, I just want a testimonial to the power of what Mark Chilton and others did in bringing the slave workers to the front. And I'll not talk to you out of the dark. Okay, here I am. Joe Nichols, a very famous carpenter who worked with built many buildings across Piedmont, North Carolina. The only reason we were able to find his put a record with him was because of the work of Mark Chilton and the group that found when the Nichols was purchased, and Joe Nichols. And but of course, the other end of it is we don't have a record of when he was sold again. So anyway, I just wanted to commend Mark for his work, and also how much I appreciate all things that Judge Scarlett has done and all the great work she continues to do, both of them. And I'm really excited to hear that the clerk of court may have additional records for us, and that we will learn more as time goes by. Mark, you might comment on what other counties have done or not done across the state in similar ways. And I'll go off at this point.
Yeah, well, thank you, Steve, for those kind comments. I think what so several other counties have done some similar work to what Orange County has, what you see on that OCNC slaverecords.blogspot.com website. I think probably on the order of 15 counties, maybe more at this point, have done that type of inventory and made that information available. And now UNC Greensboro has received a National Humanities Foundation grant to try and expand that work to cover all of the counties. And so that is in progress. I think which is really great, because just to speak really frankly, there are some counties where people would rather not poke around in these records, where they do not want to hear the kind of things that Beverly Scarlett has told us about our own county and about our own history. So we are gradually, somewhat gradually, getting to the point where that level of data will be available statewide, which is very exciting. But as far as I know, in terms of the other two projects that we're working on in Orange County, looking at slave records in court records, and doing a project on free people of color from before the Civil War, I'm not aware of any county that has undertaken either of those things in North Carolina. You know, that's part of the reason we do it here, is to sort of hopefully give an example to others of how it might be done in other places. So, thanks.
There is a question in here that says, is there any conversation around reparations for the descendants of slaves in Orange County, / is there a plan to use these records for other purposes?
Judge, I don't know if you want to comment.
I can start, and then Mr. Chilton, you can follow up. I've not heard one sound about reparations for descendants of slaves in Orange County. Maybe it's happening and nobody's told me about it, but I have not heard anything. As to other work around these records, of course, Mr. Chilton mentioned a small written book that's going to come out hopefully sometime next year. I've had it edited, so I'm just at the point of identifying a good printer, but that work is centered around the blog dealing with apprenticeships. I don't think people really understand how the apprenticeship system was used to dismantle free people of color. And I've selected just a few families who I know the last names are still predominant in and around Hillsborough. And I also set out the history as far back as I could find it as to when these people became free or were documented as free people. And these free people were living in community with Native Americans, women who had been indentured servants, and runaway slaves, living in community, operating independent of this system that they knew was unfair, didn't want anything to do with. Yet our lawyers, judges found ways to take children from their mothers and put on plantations and have them working along beside slaves. And these are kids who were not bought, they were taken.
Yeah, that's horrifying. I did have a question myself. For both of you all, do you all have any tips or recommendations for people who are just starting to get into looking at these records? Is there anything to look out for, or is there anything, sometimes this stuff can be pretty nuanced. And so do you all have any kind of tips or recommendations for people who are wanting to get in to look through these records, anything to look out for, I guess? I don't know if that makes any sense, but just kind of to help people kind of starting to comb through this stuff.
Sure. So I will say, from the perspective of a person of color, I would encourage more people of color to do it. It's hard. Yeah, it's going to be some hurtful things. Yeah, there are going to be shocking things. But as Mr. Chilton started out with, it's really a story of survival, endurance, and all of those things that we respect today. A difficulty is that if you don't have the slave master's name, you will be, and you're searching for Abe, you might find 50 Abes. You don't know which one is yours. So it's good to know at least the area where your ancestor may have lived or descended, and try to narrow down the plantations, like where I am now, literally just off the Native American trading path. We had Whittits with plantations, Holdens, Thompsons. We know Hard Scrabble. I just talked about the Canes. We had the Lipscomb plantation. And then we end up with Snow Hill that became a part of Stagville. And that's just on this one road, you know, so I haven't even veered off that one road. I do know along Pleasant Green, that's where the Scarletts had their plantation, and Few and Cave, but that's within a 7-mile radius pretty much as far as Pleasant Green Road and St. Mary's Road, the old trading path, but just that trading path, and it does make sense because this path starts in Petersburg, Virginia, and it would take you to Augusta, Georgia. So what better place to set up a lot of plantations other than where the road is already cut?
I think that's well said. What I would add to it is, you know, one of the things I realized early on in looking at these records was just what Judge Scarlett just mentioned, that knowing the names of white enslavers who were involved in the lives of these people of color, of these enslaved people, is very important, and you know, is a good shortcut to narrowing down the scope of your search to the most relevant pieces of information. But one of the things that I gradually come to appreciate is that it's a two-way street. That, in other words, to understand the lives of enslaved people, we do need to know about their enslavers. But really, the reverse can be said. You know, that we can't hope to understand the lives of white folks who were enslaving people without understanding the lives of the people that they enslaved. And so you know, that both of these things need to inform one another. And so it's not just about knowing and understanding, as Judge Scarlett's actually done a great job of illustrating this in her own work. That is to say, she has done, I would say, as much work on understanding the white enslavers named Scarlett as she has on the people that those Scarletts enslaved. And that in order to know the whole story, we've got to look at both things.
That's a really good point. And I think too, sometimes, I know for me at least, because it's hard, you get into this stuff and it's hard to kind of piece it all together. But, you know, sometimes we will also use the census records, and we'll use the slave schedules to try to match things up, especially if you're trying to narrow it down and look for specific people. But it is really tough. And you all have both done a really wonderful job. That looks like that is it for the questions for today. If anyone has a question that they're just thinking about this afternoon or anytime the rest of the week, don't hesitate to email me and I'm happy to pass it along. Mark and Beverly, thank you so much. You were so enlightening, helpful, wonderful. Certainly appreciate this. For everyone else, thank you for joining us this early afternoon. Thank you for giving us your lunchtime. We've had lots of comments in here. Thank you so much. This is so great. You guys are the best, all of that. If you all enjoyed this, we do our next Lunch and Learn will be in August, and that is going to be about the WPA narratives. And so you can also sign up, same place you signed up for this. And we hope to see everyone there. Beverly, Mark, again, thank you so much for all of your hard work, your diligent, wonderful work. And thank you again for sharing that with us today. This has all been recorded. I'm going to edit this later this week, and we will send it out early next week with the article from Beverly, the link she's going to send me. I'll include the link to the slave records, and then I will also send out a link to the Orange County deed, so you can kind of start piecing everything together. It's like one big puzzle that can get kind of complicated. So again, thank you all, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
Bye, guys.